this is a very interesting system. So when we left off on Tuesday, we were doing a comparison between the nervous system and our endocrine system, because if you remember, one thing that I have stated since day one of the class, these two systems control the body. So the endocrine system, the nervous system, and they are very closely related. So let's begin to look at the anatomy, the parts that are found in the endocrine system. Now, the pituitary gland, the hypothalamus. I mentioned on Tuesday that the pituitary gland is known as the master gland. However, it is controlled by the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus being a primitive region of your body. So it's going to be very important to our homeostasis of the body. Yes, endocrine system is important to that. At the area here, between this gland of the endocrine system and this part of the brain, this is where the nervous system, the endocrine system connect. So at this point, we have the connection between the brain and this gland. The hypothalamus. So if we come over here and if we look at this area, they're trying to give us a generalized idea of where the hypothalamus is. And then, do you see how it kind of does a little dip down, dip back up, and then we move into our pituitary gland? Do you see how we have this connection? Because this becomes important. Okay, this little stalk that's existing right here, that becomes very important to us. So that's our connection between the brain and this gland of the endocrine system. When we begin to look at what happens, the hypothalamus regulates secretions of the anterior pituitary gland. Let's stop right there. I haven't mentioned it because I was waiting for this. The anterior pituitary. So that tells me I've got two parts. I have an anterior pituitary and I have a posterior pituitary. How big did I say this gland was? The size of a pea. About the size of a green pea. So as we begin to look at it, because it's coming down off of that stalk that I tried to point out, becomes very important to us. We're going to see it do like that. And we're going to have the anterior and the posterior. The hypothalamus regulates secretions of the anterior. The posterior is an extension of the hypothalamus. What's the difference being told right there? What's it telling me about the tissue makeup? The hypothalamus regulates secretion of the anterior.
It's dominant.
But the cell makeup, what am I being told about the cellular makeup between the anterior and the posterior? Nervous tissue is made up of what? What kinds? I want you to tell me what kinds of cells. Nervous tissue contains and the cell is called what? What do we call the cell in nervous tissue? A neuron. The posterior pituitary is an extension of the hypothalamus. Is the hypothalamus not neuron tissue? Therefore, it's telling me that the cellular makeup of the posterior pituitary is what type of cell? Neurons. It is neural tissue. But the anterior pituitary, because it is controlled or regulated by the hypothalamus, what is the tissue type there? Controls secretion. What cells of our body are able to secrete? Well, the gland is the gland, the pituitary gland. But a cell, think of our regular types of cells. So that tells me the anterior is strictly cellular, where we're going to see cell, okay? But those cells get to secrete something. So the posterior, nervous tissue, anterior, cellular. In this little tiny pea. And if I were to try to put it back onto the brain here, which I can't, it would be swinging right there. This right here. It would just be swinging. It got broken off, but it would just be swinging off the base of the brain right here. Do you happen to know the bone that houses and protects the pituitary gland?
The cranial gland and the corpus callosum.
The what?
The active gland. The cranial gland.
Any other guesses? But I can't, it got broken off. But it would just be swinging off the base of the brain. Y'all remember the solid turcica? No? Didn't have to learn that in part one? Now, I want you guys to think about this. Okay? Having an anterior and a posterior swinging off the base of the brain, sitting in its bone structure, having anterior, posterior parts, the master gland, and look at the rest of your body. I do not see looks of amazement. It should be, wow. Come on, everybody with me. Wow. Thank you. So, this structure gets really interesting between the anterior and the posterior. The anterior, which is what? Cellular or nervous? Cellular, produces 9 major hormones. Look what it does. Regulates body functions, regulates the secretions of other endocrine glands. What were some of the other glands? The adrenal glands, the thymus, pancreas, the thyroid. So it produces hormones that regulate body functions, regulate secretions of those other endocrine glands. I just tried to get you guys to figure this one out. The structure of this pituitary gland, anterior, posterior. Posterior neurons. Therefore, the term neuro. Because anytime we're dealing with the neurons, neuro. Another term for the pituitary gland is the hypophyseal gland. So the posterior pituitary, being neuron tissue, is also known as the neurohypophysis. So if you ever see it in this matter, that's letting you know we're looking at the posterior pituitary gland. The extension of the nervous system by way of the infundibulum. What the heck? The stalk. This is my infundibulum. Infund. Because it's fun, you guys. Seriously. It really is. I know it's 8 o'clock in the morning. Evidently my coffee has kicked in. Okay? Had a good night's sleep. Got up on time this morning. I'm good to go. All right? So, if I begin to look at this structure, my posterior pituitary, my anterior pituitary, by way of this infundibulum, the posterior has the connection, let me see here. My little hypothalamus coming down, going up a little bit, coming back down. All right, is everybody with me? My hypothalamus. Y'all know I'm trying to draw a neuron, right? Trying to draw it to my hypothalamus. Is everybody following me? And going by way of the stalk. The anterior pituitary. For the anterior pituitary, this one being cellular. Now, has what's termed 3 areas. However, when you begin to look at them, you can't really see the boundaries. So we have to use a visual in our head of the boundaries that are there. And pars. Parts, pieces. Okay? So we think of it as being parts of this anterior pituitary. Okay? So we're going to have one distalis. What does that make you think about? Distal. What about